Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. They've been trading fire for over a week. Israel and Iran locked in a dangerous escalation. It began when Israel struck Iranian nuclear sites and top military brass. Since then, the tit-for-tat attacks have hit not just those targets, but civilians as well. As both sides show no signs of backing down, the world watches and waits. The U.S. has signaled it could step in, a move Iran has warned will be met with retaliation. But President Trump says he'll decide in 2 weeks. Other world leaders are trying to offer off-ramps to diffuse tensions. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for a tough negotiated settlement. Meanwhile, Türkiye's President Erdoğan says his country is working to stop Israeli aggression across the region. China and Russia have condemned Israel's actions, but say diplomacy is the only way forward. So what happens next? And how far will world powers go to stop this from spiraling out into an all-out war? For more, joining me now from Izmir is John Casapola, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. From Rome, Maria Luisa Fantapi, Head of the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Africa Program at the Institute for International Affairs. And from Washington, D.C., Foreign Policy Analyst Rich Outzen. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Israel, Iran, it's what everybody's talking about. It's what we're going to talk about today. John, I want to start with you. And I think the most basic question, what right now is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's endgame?
Well, we got three drivers that are shaping this conflict. One, the Iranian airspace right now is a semi-permissive one. So the Israeli Air Force, especially taking advantage of its fifth-generation combat capabilities through the F-35s, are flying over the Iranian airspace. They're hunting down for transporter erector launchers for the Iranian ballistic missiles. They are attacking pre-planned targets, which are diminishing, by the way, which is usual for such operations like Natanz nuclear facility, like important command and control nodes of the Revolutionary Guards. And they are after the high cards, the important figures of the Iranian security apparatus and the scientific community. I think in the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's mind, there are two things. First, the operation went well, but it is stalling right now, and Israel is closing to its limits. And second, if the Fordo nuclear facility remains intact, then Iran gonna go nuclear. It is unstoppable, and the only way to take out Fordo nuclear facility, assuming that the Israelis would not dare a sabotage operation by Mossad or Special Forces penetration, is American involvement. So I think the million-dollar question in Prime Minister Netanyahu's mind is if or when the Americans will get involved by their bomber fleet and take care of Fordo nuclear facility.
Maria, will the Americans get involved, and how involved will the Europeans be? Are they divided, or are they in lockstep with each other?
The United States has to make a historical decision. This is why President Trump, at least the statement that came out from the White House yesterday, said that Trump will wait for 2 weeks on thinking about that decision. And I guess that the decision, it's on the one hand, that one of either getting involved into a conflict that in some way could also drag the United States and the presidency of Trump into an unwanted war with unpredictable consequences, because we do know that even if there is a strong destabilization of the Iranian regime, then, and even if there is potentially a fall of it, that opens up to scenarios that are highly unpredictable, that the United States doesn't want to get involved in. So for the United States, I think there is an evaluation of getting involved only if they have the certainty that they can do a very surgical attack on Fordo without having major consequence. But they cannot have that certainty. So obviously, the best option on the table for the United States, the less costly and the best one, is actually to return to the table of the negotiation and put forward the proposal to the Iranians that actually it's somehow reasonable, so that this will be a win for Trump and a win for everyone. As for the Europeans, they have been the E3, so UK, Germany, and France. They have been quite, let's say, united in their position of saying, well, we should actually reinstate the snapback sanction before these attacks took place. So in some way, they have been complicit to the escalation. Now we see that there is a moment of reasoning and moment of rethinking that approach with today meeting between the E3 and the Iranians. So let's hope that this meeting could actually be a ramp off that actually helps not only the Europeans, but also the Iranians and the United States to reopen negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Rich, in 2016, we had maximum pressure on policy by the Trump administration. Now we have a war that started. We're in the second week, and Trump says, I need to think about it 2 more weeks. So that's basically a month of sitting, waiting, and watching. Does Trump want to enter the war? Is he skittish on this? Does he want to get back to the table? What's the calculation going through his mind? Or does he want to let Netanyahu sweat it out a little?
Well, it's good to be with you, Yusuf. Look, I think the best lens to view the U.S. policymaking and Trump's timing on this is through the lens of coercive diplomacy. So coercive diplomacy theory basically says that when you have a country that's recalcitrant on something of critical interest to a great power, that you go through this cycle of escalation. Essentially, it's a 5-step process. You identify a clear demand, you make a potent threat, you have an escalatory process, then you offer an off-ramp, and then you go into negotiations. So the maximum effectiveness of that comes after when you still have a potent threat on the table and that target still has something to lose that's more valuable than the thing that you're asking them to give up. And in this case, I think we have that. I think Trump has achieved that through this pressure campaign, which, by the way, I think has been coordinated sub rosa with the Israelis. And right now in Tehran, the very survival of the regime is at stake. And frankly, they can save their regime, at least in theory, through negotiations if they're willing to denuclearize, and by that I mean the weaponization. They don't need to enrich at 60%. And with respect, there is a reasonable offer on the table for that. We don't need the Europeans to identify the off-ramp for Iran. For Iran, the off-ramp is you open yourself to inspections. You can keep nuclear, even enrichment activities for a peace level, a peaceful nuclear energy level, which is well below the 20%. They're currently enriching at 60%. There's only one reason to do that, and that is for the development of nuclear weapons. So I want to just touch on this issue of certainty and uncertainty as well. President Trump is okay. He has a high tolerance for uncertainty. What we're faced with currently is the certainty that if the United States and Israel and Europe don't act in concert, Iran will have nuclear weapons. And that's something that not the Turks, not the Israelis, not the Americans want. This is a apocalyptic regime that threatens death and destruction. It refers to its regional neighbors as the great Satans and little Satans, and threatens to wipe Israel off the map. Nobody wants this regime to have nuclear weapons. So for the interests of everyone involved, this waiting period is really the denouement by Trump of the escalatory period. And it's not letting Netanyahu sweat it out. It's letting the Ayatollahs sweat it out as they understand that their regime may well come to an end if they don't forego the nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. John, you're a student of weapons in war. You said that after a quick start, the Israeli attack stalled a little. Now, do you foresee this turning into a protracted war? And if it does, how is that going to play out? Whose benefit is it going to be?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, the diminishing trend in the target set is the natural result of any air campaign, because you have a list of targets pre-planned by and selected by your intelligence. Then your air force, your missile forces, and your standoff weaponry starts melting them down, and then you naturally have, even in the bestly planned and best executed operation, you have a diminishing, melting down target set. That being said, we have to understand the situation through a sports analogy. The Israelis have better muscles, they have better nutrition, and they can run faster. The Iranians, on the other hand, they have the stamina. Although they cannot run faster compared to the Israelis, they can always outrun Israel. So there are certain reasons for that. The magazine depth is important. Every single day, protecting the Israeli skies, which is costing more than $1 billion, is depleting the exo-atmospheric interceptors, 2 batteries of American THAADs, and the Israeli Arrow 3s and Arrow 2s. The Iranians, on the other hand, they are following the North Korean model, so their entire arsenal is buried underground. They have tunnels and subterranean architecture hosting their missiles. So the best shot for the Israelis is to prey on the launchers, but Iran is a huge country with a very harsh topography, so you can prey on and hit those launchers, but not annihilate, destroy the entire launcher fleet. The second thing is the Iranians will keep shooting and shooting and shooting back, throwing everything they have at the Israelis. And missile warfare is an offense-dominant regime. So imagine that like you have a bulletproof vest and I'm shooting my revolver at you. I'm shooting 6 bullets. Your bulletproof vest is stopping 5 of them. So mathematically, there is 83% interception rate. Medically, you are dead. That's the situation of Israel right now. It is facing the Iranian missiles. Its interception rates are high. Its preventive campaign on the Iranian airspace is going well. But still, this is an offense-dominant regime. For each 30 missiles or 40 missiles, 3 or 4 leaks, especially on Israeli population centers, and this is deliberate targeting by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, is bleeding Israel. We have to keep one thing in mind. Missile defense and missile defense systems are not made for merely solely defensive operations. They are designed to buy time for your offensive weapon systems to get the job done. Again, as I said, the Israelis can get the job done in the Iranian proper to a certain extent. They have limitations, and these limitations are actually shaping the conflict. As the conflict goes on and becomes prolonged, the only way for the Iranians is to outrun and go nuclear.
Maria, I was going to ask you a question, but you scrunched your eyebrows. Do you want to comment on what John just said, or should I move forward?
Well, I mean, I must disagree on 2 points. Like, one is about the point of the unpredictability being welcome that was made earlier. I'm not sure we are like sort of aware of what we are talking about. When we say that we are like welcoming unpredictability, it means that the United States will be actually ready to undergo a prolonged conflict. And also we have to take into account the fact that it's not that by hitting Iran necessarily you will achieve actually either the undermining of its ballistic missile infrastructure or the like potential collapse of the regime. So there are unpredictable scenarios over there that could materialize, one of which is potentially also the fact that actually this war, if it gets stalled like it's happening now, it actually gives a refreshed legitimacy to the most hardliner faction within the Iranian regime, who have been for long saying that it's useless to negotiate with the West, it's useless to negotiate on enrichment, and the only thing that is helpful is actually to build a deterrence capacity, and therefore that also include going nuclear. So I'm not sure how actually this offensive campaign, which, as I said, can actually lead to potentially backfiring results, because it could actually deliver a regime that wants to go nuclear and will be more nuclear, will be more radicalized than it was before, rather than the second option, which is actually that one of and in this I agree with the previous speaker, of actually seizing this momentum also to bring back parties at the table. So I do agree that there is also an opportunity in the campaign of, in some way, levering on the pressure to force the Iranians in some way to a negotiation. However, that opportunity needs to be seized, and if it's not seized, actually we are going into the first scenario that I described, which is one of a stalled campaign with unpredictable costs and consequences for everyone involved.
Rich, Iran has two big backers, Russia and China. Under what circumstances do you expect them to try to tip the scales in Iran's favor? For example, if the U.S. does enter the war beyond just material support, do you think that could trigger more support from Moscow and Beijing?
Well, first, let me address the somewhat tautological reasoning that your previous speaker had. The idea that uncertainty somehow strengthens the Iranian regime is simply not supportable in light of coercive diplomacy theory and basic psychology. It is the certainty that they will not be attacked and that they will always have a negotiated way out that has led the mullah's regime to pursue pell-mell this nuclearization and weaponization of a nuclear program. Until they feel great uncertainty in their minds, they will not negotiate, and they have no real reason to negotiate. So I think it's a very unrealistic approach to think that, if they always know that we'll go back to negotiations and that we're not going to go for the jugular, that's the ticket to a better outcome. This is simply false. It is absolutely true that the certainty that they will get to nuclear weapons if we don't take strong action now is at the heart of everything we've seen in this portfolio for the last 20 years. Now, with regards to Russia and China, Russia obviously is fully occupied with its own aggressive war against Ukraine. They have, in fact, as my colleague John Kasapoğlu has noted multiple times, had to rely on Iranian weapons to conduct much of their war against Ukraine. So the fact that they don't have spare capacity means the most that they could do would be some sort of diplomatic gesturing. Now, China's more interesting case. China could do some things, especially as you note, if the United States starts an active bombing campaign against Fordow and other targets to really set this nuclear program, even if the Iranian regime remains recalcitrant, to set this back decades through an extensive bombing campaign using our full capabilities. If we were to do that, there would be the opportunity for mischief in the Pacific. So I think China, however, is very much self-interested. And I think that the costs, both in terms of economy, they want to shorten this war, I think, as much as possible because they're dependent on Iranian oil. I think that any military escalation from China would probably be out of the question because the costs to them are high potentially and the benefits to them are fairly low. What they will do is, in terms of intelligence support, in terms of cyber warfare potentially, and diplomatic weight, they'll be a little more active than Russia in trying to portray the United States and Israel as aggressors and Iran as something of an aggrieved victim. And they will take careful notes about everything that the U.S. and Israel are doing in their campaign, because I still believe that China ultimately sees its main theater of potential conflict not in Iran, which is a secondary theater for them, but ultimately for Taiwan Straits and that crisis. So they're taking notes. They'll learn the lessons, but I would not expect much more than sort of cheerleading for the Iranians and some diplomatic, cyber, and perhaps espionage support on their behalf.
You know, it's interesting listening to all three of you speak, seeing the different approach between the Americans and Europe towards what's going on in Israel and Iran. And it's kind of playing out in the three of your analysis. John, I want to ask you about Türkiye. What's Türkiye's red lines, and how do you see them approaching the continuation of this conflict?
Well, first of all, Türkiye suffered from influx of human waves coming from the Syrian civil war more than a decade long. I think one more refugee crisis at Turkey's doorstep is #1 nightmare of the Turkish government. And I think Turkish capacity to digest and buffer all these refugee waves coming from the Middle East and protecting and safeguarding the gates of Europe has come to an end. So number one priority is to prevent conflict from escalating further and putting an end to the threat of yet another human wave pouring into the Turkish soil. Second, although this is not making the headlines, I think the Turkish-Iranian military balance is a very delicate one. And although the Turkish and the Iranian officials are not fighting before the cameras, we can see the showdown and geopolitical competition, which is imperial legacy between the two nations in the region. So in Syria, the two parties were at odds. The Iranians were on the losing side after the demise of the Ba'ath regime, and Türkiye was on the winning side, has been developing the regional outlook with the El-Shara government. In Iraq, we have seen this showdown. All the corners of the Middle East, we are seeing that there is room for either Turkish influence to rise or the Iranian influence to rise. Again, as I said, this is not making the headlines, but this is an important trend. Third, and relatedly, although, again, Turkey is not very vocal about that, especially compared to the Israeli officials and some American voices, a nuclear Iran, a weapons-grade, military-capable nuclear Iran is definitely a threat to Türkiye. Türkiye is very loyal to non-proliferation regimes in the nuclear realm as to biological and chemical weapons. It is a member of NATO, so NATO is a nuclear alliance, and it will remain so as long as the nuclear weapons exist. So it is under the nuclear umbrella, but Turkey also has a bilateral strategic agenda with Iran, and one side having a nuclear weapon, the other side staying on within the margins of conventional weaponry is definitely not favoring Ankara's strategic interest. I think Turkey's best way right now is to it is getting closer to the European position, finding a diplomatic settlement to the conflict and prevent it from further escalation, while ensuring that Iran will not get nuclear weapons and a military-grade nuclear capability.
When we look at what happened in Syria, what happened in Libya, Europe obviously took on a lot of migration. Is there appetite for another migration flow, or is there a lot of concern, especially amongst the left-wing countries where they saw a rise in right-wing votes from this migration? Are they motivated domestically to see this end very quickly?
Look, John, I think that there is an overall agreement across the political spectrum in Europe, whether left or right, that nobody wants actually another war in the Middle East. So this, regardless of the aspect of migration, there is like great concern that another escalation could also have, for example, other impacts. I just, want to mention, for instance, how one country, which is my country, Italy, was greatly impacted over the past years by the crisis in the Red Sea, for instance, which is was another spillover effect of the Gaza war. So everyone knows that a continuation of this war and potentially also a prolonged war could actually lead to an expansion that will strongly backfire on European interests on different levels. So it's not only the migration aspect that is a matter of concern, but also is the entire spillover effect that this could have also across the Levant, with, we haven't mentioned it yet, but a US involvement, for instance, could also lead paramilitary groups that are connected to Iran to actually attack not only US bases, but Western bases in Iraq or elsewhere. So once again, there is a general, there is no appetite really for another conflict. And this is why I think the E3, not only the E3, but also the EU institution and also single member state at the level of the European Union, they have to do more, and I think more than what they have done in the last months to actually make possible a return at the negotiation table. Just a quick note to say that it is true that there is a logic into coercive diplomacy, but I want also to reaffirm that the Israeli attack happened at a moment where we were into another process, a diplomatic process, which I can affirm the Iranians were very committed to. So in some way, I mean, if that process was actually had been supported and it led to actually deliver results, we could have had a good agreement, a good deal, without having the costs on civilians and the costs that we are seeing over the past 6 days.
I hate to say this, but we're out of time. John, Maria, Rich, great conversation. Thank you. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.